So in this episode, we're going to be looking at sketchbooks, and it's going to be a little bit all over the place. I'm going to try and make it as organized as possible, but the subject of sketchbooks is a tricky one because it covers so much ground. So on the one hand, I can categorize things into animal drawings, architecture drawings, museum artifact drawings from several archaeological collections, or skeletons from natural history museums. But then you have architecture that comes into my travel sketchbooks because I travel to places where I find interesting buildings to draw, and I travel and find interesting animals to draw. Also, within the categories of subject comes the category of how I choose to finish a sketch. So some of the sketches could be quite casual, very fast, more about a travel impression or a fleeting moment that I wanted to capture. You then go to more careful page layouts, organized and composed in such a way that it's almost more of a conscientious composition in the sketchbook. So my early sketchbooks would mainly concentrate on drawing things around me that I would maybe today choose to paint instead. It was pre-Florence Academy days, so I hadn't had that much training in painting yet. So my sketchbooks were mostly my opportunity to translate what I had around me into two-dimensional form. Since far before my Florence Academy days, I was already interested in working from a sketchbook. Personally, all my drawings started with dinosaurs. I don't have any of those drawings anymore, but I did find these recently. They sort of show an early interest in the natural sciences. Seems to be a bit of an obsession with butterflies, mushrooms, and caterpillars. And I still do dinosaur drawings today. I can't get away from that stuff. They're the best. It was really just a matter of engaging with my environment, connecting with subjects I loved. Other people might read books on the subject or study the biology. I found that drawing it fulfilled my need to explore and better understand what I saw around me. I had the privileged access when I was a kid to the local aquariums where I could enter before the public. So I'd get up at 6 a.m. when I was on my holidays from school. I actually don't remember how I got the idea, but I remember I had the opportunity, I tried it out, and after my first visit, I was hooked. It was amazing being in these dark hallways in complete silence, just with the light glowing out of each water tank. I would rest my sketchbook right on the ledge to have some light on my paper, as the hallways were actually dimly lit and everything was quite dark. I'd never done this before, and I had a lot of choice. So the way I chose to start with is I stopped at a large fish, a very slow-moving fish. Two fish of the same species and size would glide smoothly back and forth in this tank. This meant I could draw as much as I could when it would circle close to the glass, and then once it was gone, I would wait with my hand hovering above the page, ready to start again as soon as the fish came back. Same thing with the sharks, but this was faster. Another tank where things moved less was the giant moray eels. 3 of these huge green Caribbean eels that would pose in the position for hours. The drawing was over several days from several poses, and I included also a lifestyle detail, these shrimps that actually go into the mouths of the eels to clean them out. So aside from these animal studies, my interest also went towards architecture. So I've got examples of drawing in the Natural History Museum of London, and also I've got some examples of more recent visits. So it's interesting to see how I'm still interested in the same aspects, but just with a slightly different approach now. When I was at the university in London, I would always go to the museums at the weekend and sketch, whether it was indoors or outdoors. I was not yet educated about what paintings I should be looking at. I was mostly interested in ancient culture, artifacts, sculptures from across the world, keen on drawing them and making them part of my visual collection. When I attended Florence Academy, my weekends continued down the same path. I would not be in the studio at the weekend, and I made sure I continued to draw what I loved. Getting out of the studio or out of town to draw architecture, sculpture, museum collections, landscapes. you don't want to let that part of you go, otherwise you can run the risk of forgetting why you're training. So presumably you're looking for training at the academy for improving your skills at painting what you already love to paint. And so if you lose touch of that, you run the risk of getting all this training and then forgetting why you trained in the first place. So what's sketching for? Well, I was interested to see where the word came from, and as often is the case, it jumps across language barriers. So the English definition is a rough or unfinished drawing or painting, often made to assist in making a more finished picture. Okay, so in French, the definition is a little different. To translate that, it says to sketch in terms of painting signifies to draw or to paint in a rough way and with speed so that the drawing or painting isn't finished. But that was revised. They actually modified it a little bit in 1835. Still with speed, but it talks about getting the principal traits and characteristics of objects for which you want to conserve a memory, such as a figure, a group, some fabric. It also signifies to just find in a few traits the first idea of a painting or of a composition. So it seems that in most cases, the idea of sketching is seen as a hasty exercise leading to an unfinished result. But in French, by 1835, it had added the quality of being described as a process to capture the main characteristics of a subject to conserve as a memory. So in plenty of my sketchbooks, this is definitely the case. Sometimes, not to let an idea disappear, I will jot it down in a few lines to keep a visual concept alive. Instead of writing through a bunch of words, a few simple lines can tell you everything you need. In other sketchbooks, I've spent much more time. I pushed it to more of a finish, but still keeping the essential traits, which is good practice in the exercise of selection, which is very important in painting. Being selective and knowing what to include and what to ignore is one of the most important aspects of composition. So learning to select the main traits is important training. Sketching is a really great training ground to develop your eye, your selective process, and accumulate visual knowledge of things around you. It can also be a great treasure trove of ideas that you'd forgotten about because you didn't pursue them at the time. I always love going through old random sketchbooks. It's fun to see what I was thinking at different moments. It shows me how I chose. The choices that I made get concentrated into a single page and reveal the place I was at the time. Both the actual place, but also my mindset at the time. We all go through ups and downs in our creative process. When you've lost focus on something, revisiting a sketchbook can be a great way of getting back into a creative place. Hopefully, most of the sketches you take on were sparked off by something special, driven by intense interest or imagination. So when you're in a creative slump, revisiting these moments of drawing can actually revitalize you. It can remind you where your mind needs to focus and why. So here's an interesting one, because these are some of the older drawings I was doing, but still interested in the same subject matter. So it seems, going through all these sketchbooks, that I've noticed that I'm still interested in the same sort of subject matter. So here, from some of these pulleys and ropes from a yacht in the port here, to slightly more finished drawings and showing a little bit more control these days with the pencil, and going into quite a similar sort of subject matter, the pulleys and the ropes and the knots and so on. So interesting to see how my interest is still sparked off by the same subject matter. Okay, so in this more recent sketchbook, here's another sketch I did of the same steps, sitting in a different spot, different approach, probably a lot more controlled pencil work than the old pen. But again, with the pen, I suppose I was pretty careful. there's a lot of clumsy lines around. It's very sketchy and very repetitive. A lot of hairy lines like this. But ultimately, trying to keep it as clean as I could. Here's a different approach. Um, More thinking of how the whole page layout has a specific design. How this entire open space here is just a big light shape, and how all of this is in shadow. In this drawing, there doesn't seem to be as much attention to where the light is or where the shadows are. It just seems to be mainly a linear drawing, just outlines without necessarily trying to get a sense of design from the light shapes to the shadow shapes. Although obviously there's shadow areas within street recesses there. Clearly, my recent sketches much more deliberate and much more intent on trying to actually create a double page spread sort of presentation. So when to sketch? Even when I was traveling with a decent camera, I would still set time aside to sketch. Years ago, in Morocco or Sri Lanka or in Egypt, I would come back with about 20 rolls of film, but I'd still had my sketchbooks with me. Its purpose was not just journalistic, but it was in-depth description and engagement with my environment. In my early days, I used to only have large A3 books. Then eventually I went to smaller ones, as most of my drawing was done at the easel at the academy, and my sketchbook drawings were more about developing ideas. So the little ones are easy to carry around and jot things down when they popped into my mind. My smaller sketchbooks have more written notes and seem to be filled more with conceptual ideas. These little sketchbooks also were useful to work out landscape paintings that I wanted to engage with. So doing little thumbnail sketches in here was a way of getting prepared and not wasting my time with pursuing a painting that wasn't going to work. And occasionally, I would sort of alternate between sketching from life for the purpose of doing a painting, like these landscape thumbnail sketches. But then also I would be imagining concepts for compositions, figurative compositions. And so these little books also became quite useful for just developing ideas. So here, for example, here's a clear page layout for composition for one of my paintings I did in Florence, the Red Jacket. This would have been maybe without the model. So these are just sort of initial concepts of imagining how I could do a pose, and then once the model turns up, then you make the pose fit the model as much as you can and follow your sketch as much as you can. You try and find a sort of a compromise between the two. Then I went bigger again as I realized I was engaging more in my subjects around me. Then bigger still to the current size of A4, but I also am choosing slightly stiffer paper as well. I started realizing that with the pursuit of more finished drawings, my lines were going through the paper a bit. These days, my larger sketchbooks are reserved for double page vistas and some sort of in-depth, careful studies of little curiosities I like to look at. So the physical process of drawing out studies helps you internalize the framework of the project. You need to digest the process, otherwise you are not strengthening your position for the onslaught of problem solving throughout the painting process. It steadies you and makes you sure about the line you're taking. It also gives you a sense of confidence that really helps. When a painting project takes, for example, a month or so to complete, there's plenty of opportunities for doubt to set in. And if you don't have the architecture of your project internalized, it can be easy for you to stray off the path and lose focus, especially if you're taking on something that requires you juggling many different elements that you can't necessarily have directly in front of you every day. So, for example, when I was doing this larger project of this winged figure, I had several different things I had to study. I had the figure, I had the background, the immediate background, I had the distant background, I had the feathers, So these are all different things that I was not necessarily just painting straight in my studio. I was painting them at different moments. So my initial drawings and my internalization of the whole project was really important, so I would keep on track. I could keep all those elements tied together in my mind so that I wasn't losing focus of the big picture. So today everyone feels the need to be so clean and presentable. Everyone is bombarded with images of people's work that show everything only in its best light. So sketchbook ideas are not that. They're your inner thoughts, your inner journey. They are for you to understand. They don't need to be pretty or presentable for the public. You don't have to compare to someone else's sketchbook that was posted on social media. You mustn't care so much about how other people's work looks. Just let your sketchbook grow, nurture it, share it with your teachers for your process, but don't be afraid of being judged. In any case, the people who really count in your mentorship will not judge a sketchbook full of ideas. They may only judge the lack of sketchbooks. Sketching is useful for developing an idea. You need to push through and understand every stage of the way. Just like the rest of the training, this can be a valuable element in your arsenal to take on complex projects that need to be broken down into stages. And every stage of the way can lead to a project in its own right. It's not always the end product that is necessarily the best. When you revisit a set of drawings that got you to a certain place, it's worth looking at the intermediate stages. So, in a different mood, at a different time, you may respond suddenly to that preliminary stage. Take this page, for example, from my winged figure project. Several different versions of a winged figure appear. All the initial versions have been discarded, and the only one that remains alive through my painting is the final version. So in a different mood at a different time, you may respond suddenly to that preliminary stage and think that that composition is worth taking somewhere. If I'd never drawn these early versions, I would have forgotten about them by now. So when I revisit these pages, my current state of mind, my inspiration or artistic direction might reveal to me that I may want to take one of these older ideas and see if I can take it somewhere. Who knows? We see now the broad application that sketching can have. It can be for the pure pleasure of it can be to help you explore subjects that you love, and it can be a conscious effort in developing ideas and helping your imagination to have a creative outlet to help you compose a painting. So whichever you choose, it's an easy and practical way of working because really all you need is a pad and a pencil. So get out there and sketch.